So thank you to our fourth regularly scheduled webinar for 2022. We thought that in these uncertain times for organics management, another webinar on the topic of data management was of great importance. So thank you to our new Residuals members joining us. Thank you to the regulators and other NEBRA members joining us today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone should be muted as you join the webinar. I'm asking to stay on mute until the end when I think we can open it up. You can unmute for questions and discussions. I am recording this session, and the link to the recording and the slide presentation will be provided to everyone who signed up for the webinar and all NEBRA members early next week. There is a Q&A function, should be at the bottom of your screen there, or a chat if you prefer. I'll be keeping an eye on that for the presenter, so feel free to type in any questions or comments as you think of them. I want to start out with a big shout out and thanks to Material Matters, Inc. for presenting and sponsoring this webinar. Material Matters, like NEBRA, is focused on the solids, and also like NEBRA, they've been around since 1997. Material Matters started providing its professional consulting services in Pennsylvania with an initial focus on the land application of biosolids and residuals in that state. I suspect probably related to some land reclamation work there. They're still operating out of Elizabethtown, PA, but they now serve clients in 20 states in the United States. And in addition to working with municipalities, they have commercial and industrial clients. I know they collaborate with other consultants to bring their unique experience to projects. They offer assistance with residuals and biosolids processing improvements, permitting support, master planning, market analysis, and data management, as you'll be hearing about today. And they also provide services related to water quality nutrient trading. Again, thanks to Material Matters for sponsoring this Lunch and Learn for our NEBRA members. And I'm really excited to have this dynamic duo join me today, Lisa Challenger and Trudy Johnston. Just quick intros for them. Lisa is the CEO of Material Matters, Inc., going on 3 years now, but she's been with them since 2013 in various positions, rising through the ranks there pretty quickly. She has a BS in Environmental Resource Management from Penn State. And Trudy Johnston, a founding partner and former CEO of Material Matters, is currently serving as its managing director. She's worked in the field for a long time now, and she has her BS in Earth and Geological Science from Penn State. We're leaving plenty of time for questions at the end, but plug them in as they come up. I'm going to stop sharing and have Lisa take over from me here to start her presentation. So, all right. And you can turn your camera on as well. That'd be great. I think we got both of you there, right?
All right. Yeah. So Trudy and I are tag teaming here on the same camera. So Janine, you can still hear me all right?
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so when coming up with this particular webinar, which Janine and I have been talking about for a little while, really the thought that came to mind is this beg or this ask of many of our clients to be interested in managing and owning their own data. And I thought good old Uncle Sam here was a great representation. So so the title of our presentation today is I Want You to Manage Your Data. Just a high level overview of the different topics we'll be covering. Just a touch on starting out, why is data management important, and really understanding and owning your own data as a municipal utility or as an industrial facility for those residual folks out there. And then tying that into data management and what the industry, the wastewater industry, has looked at for data management. And that's with the National Biosolids Partnership with an EMS system. So Trudy is going to be covering that topic. And then we'll be linking that into a tool that Material Matters developed a number of years ago. That's an access-based tool called Material Manager, tracking and managing biosolids and residuals data for internal records as well as for regulatory reporting requirements. And where we're at today, a transition to a cloud-based platform. So really, when we think about data management, there's a number of different facets that come to mind. So when I'm talking about data management, specifically in this webinar, we're really talking about data management as it relates to the management of biosolids and residuals material, specifically for beneficial use. So that's tracking all of the pathogen reduction, the pollutant, vector traction reduction data, but also tracking the data once it leaves the fence line. So really that's, I think, sometimes where this loss of connection. And so the reasons why we're interested in having utilities and others own and manage their data is a number of different facets. One is from a regulatory standpoint. There is a cradle to grave liability requirement. I think both of those two pieces come together. So as a municipality or utility is producing their material, at the end of the day, there's a responsibility to be tracking that material and having ownership of knowing where that material is going and how it is being managed. If there is something that is a question as to how it is, what kind of rates are being managed or where it's going, it is really the utility's onus to demonstrate that it is in regulatory compliance. Piggybacking on that is from a liability perspective. So there's a regulatory requirement for biosolids that's under 503, but there's also outside of the regulations specific to biosolids management, this liability and connection with neighbors and the public of making sure that we are owning and understanding where that material is going. Again, it is your material at the end of the day. And the third piece, which I think is sometimes overlooked, is what I'm calling ownership benefits. So utilities have a variety of different ways of managing their material, specifically for beneficial use programs, where some utilities have this great opportunity for a self-managed kind of program where they've got the trucks and direct connection to the farmers, and that's an ongoing relationship. And other utilities have an instance where there's a reliance on a third-party contractor to be managing the product on a day-to-day basis. And so by owning and maintaining your own data, there is more of a fluidity of making sure that you have access to all of your data, even over the change of a contractor engagement or over various contracts and changes in potential management from a third-party perspective. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Trudy to talk about how the data management relates to the National Biosolids Partnership.
All righty. Thank you, Lisa. And folks on the call might ask, what is the connection between the National Biosolids Partnership, or NBP, and biosolids data collection, accuracy, and retrievability? Notably, NBP advances, this is off their website, by the way, advances environmentally sound biosolids management practices, serves as the information clearinghouse on effective biosolids practices, and offers what's called an EMS, or environmental management system-based program, that requires anybody who participates, any utility that participates, to go beyond regulatory requirements. And I think that's a theme that you will hear from me and from Lisa as we go through the presentation. MVP program is a good example of how to address biosolids program management regardless of final disposition. All right, just a little bit of information about the MVP and what the advantages are of participating in that program. It really does look at a very comprehensive kind of program with enhanced regulatory compliance and risk management. After all, that's what we're all trying to do here, is make sure that we are following the regulations, but there's always that additional piece How do I make sure that the program survives? How do I make sure that the public is engaged? It also, and we'll get into this a little bit as I go through the slides, looks at improved operational efficiency and cost savings, but basically that comes back to the operational efficiency and making a good product. I'm sure that everybody on the webinar today has heard folks talk about product quality. It also is very key in public and stakeholder confidence, but engagement and participation. And how do we bring our local folks, our farmers, our biosolids community, and the farming community, if that's how we manage our biosolids, how do we involve them in the program and give them confidence? Also to access professional and best management practices. Of course, we talk about that in the wastewater industry. That's what it's all about, best management practices. But how do we access professionals and everybody involved in the program to make sure that these best practices are being followed? And I believe the NBP still does have certification tiers of bronze, silver, and gold. It's still very active. And I would hope that anybody on the call who is part of a utility that makes biosolids, I guess we all do, would really consider participating in this program. Okay, so a little bit about NBP. It was established in 1997. It was a collaborative effort between NACWA, WEF, and EPA, and there was a considerable amount of support through all those three organizations, and also the money to sort of develop the program. So there is a National Biosolids Code of Good Practice. There is this Environmental Management System, or EMS-based third-party certification program. And the entire program, which is well documented, provides utilities with all these tools. And these tools then can be used to develop an EMS system and how to put that system into place, and then how to continue on with that program. But remember, we do talk about ensuring regulatory compliance, but it's not just about regulatory compliance. It's about developing a program and conforming to all the requirements in your program, with one of the outcomes being regulatory compliance. I won't talk about goals relative to biosolids quality. That's also part of it, but we're talking about data today, so I'm going to stick to that. Okay, so what does this framework look like? It's very similar to other ISO 14001 sort of EMS framework kinds of programs, where it's a cyclical program, and it's sort of the plan, do, check, act cycle, which means that we're continually improving. As part of that program, there are 17 elements, and I think once, I'll show this slide in a minute, but I think once everybody sees these 17 elements, it will make sense. All these elements are going to be influenced and controlled by the utility. That's part of the planning process, but it does support implementation, maintenance, and improvement of the biosolids management program. Again, it's not necessarily about compliance. So these are listed here, the 17 elements. And I just want to jump back because I forgot to mention this, that I have been involved in the NBP program for decades, and I just wanted to provide sort of what the advantages are to the program. Back in 1997, I guess I didn't cover this on the last slide, but in 97, when the program was adopted and developed, it took several years. But they did have a group of initial folks who participated in the training program, and then were certified as biosolids auditors. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that early group. So that's why Lisa asked me to participate. Okay. I wanted to talk about the program is comprised of 17 elements. You can see them listed here, and this is sort of the soup to nuts approach, regardless of how biosolids are how you manage those biosolids, whether it's incineration, whether it's land application, beneficial use, doesn't matter. These are the 17 elements of that program. And you can see also there's some key pieces here that might look familiar. And I'm going to point out number 8, the element number 8, 12, and 13. And data management is important to nearly all of these elements when you think about it. For example, if we look at elements 12 and 13, they are tied to element 3, which is critical control points. How do I make a good product? And what are the points that allow me to do that? Element 4, which is legal and other requirements. This would be your permits and all your permit requirements. 6 is public participation, and that is involving the public in your program and how it operates and being able to access data when necessary. 9 is communication, and again, that's communicating with regulators, community leaders, farmers, and having that source of data makes communication much easier when questions are asked about, gee, what about farmer X that you applied, that I saw a pile of biosolids on the farm that was land applied. So it gives us that ability to easily retrieve and communicate that information. And of course, number 10, which again comes back to biosolids quality, this operational control of the critical control points. So with sound data management, the system is effective in meeting goals. So what is systems thinking? I mean, I've used that word here a lot, and I use that in the office all the time. It's the system, it's the system. And really it has to do with learning and adapting and evolving the program that you put together. Internal audits are certainly a part of that. Reviewing and correcting whatever actions you come up with, a very critical part. Consistency and resilience is also an important part, and it helps when we have staff turnover, or we have contractor turnovers, or we have any kind of disruptions in operations or quality. Also accountability, and if you look at the slide here, it shows that how many folks might be connected in this sort of this roles and responsibility for who owns the data, who reviews the data, who manages the data, and are there clear connections between all these folks who deal with managing the data and the public? And then the final part, and this is really what Lisa's going to jump into, and that's assurance. And that assures that the data is collected, stored, and retrieved when there's requests that are made. And those records are clean, well organized, and accurate. And with that, I'm going to turn it now over to Lisa to continue. Thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to jump into where I started and how this data management discussion as it relates to the National Biosolids Partnership is connected to Material Manager. Again, the software, it's an access database system developed by Material Matters back in the early 2000s. And really, how did this idea of an access database to manage data come to be? There was, and I'll talk through some of the timeline on the next slide, but there was an identified need for reliable data tracking software. And I'm sure there's still a number of utilities out there who are relying on a series of spreadsheets for data management, which can be very effective, but also there's potential for error, potential for data elimination, and potential, hey, we need to revise something from a year ago, and that cascading impact to future data can be sometimes challenging to manage from a spreadsheet or otherwise paper management of data. The other aspect is this data management and oversight, again, linking back to that National Biosolids Partnership, EMS perspective of having a tool that can be used locally for a utility to own and oversee how all of their data is being managed and used. So that's the biosolids quality data, the agronomic data, and then folding that into accurate annual reporting that will be provided to regulators. And the third aspect of why this material manager program came to be is, for anyone who has managed biosolids data, it is very complicated and perhaps very it requires a lot of knowledge. So there's biosolids quality data. There's just from a cropping side, there's the nutrient needs. And hey, we're not just talking about readily available nitrogen. There's this concept of organic nitrogen and mineralization over time. CPLR, or cumulative pollutant loading rate tracking. So metals tracking over the life of a site, which again, it's not a straightforward calculation. That's a one and done. There's an additive series here that every single input has a cascading effect. And then really the annual reporting. Hey, is there a tool or system that we can put in place to make annual reporting a little bit easier or a little bit more streamlined? And the last thing, which I think we sometimes overlook, is this idea of calendar year versus crop year, reporting year versus crop year. Again, anyone who's familiar with managing biosolids or residuals for crops is, hey, we're reporting from January 1st to December 31st. But you know what? That's not the farming cycle. So there's a number of complicating factors as we're managing this data. Can we put a tool in place that can be pretty reliable, that we can maneuver all of these variables and still know that we're going to have a correct answer at the end of the day? So how did Material Manager come to be? This is a high-level timeline of really the start of the regulatory framework as we know today to today. So in 1993, there was the promulgation of Part 503 regulations. Again, we're generally all familiar with, and that's really where there's a pretty established look at what are those records that are required to be kept, for how long you need to keep them. What are those, what are the nutrient availability factors? And again, that's 1993 is when that cumulative pollutant loading rate, or CPLR, came to be of, hey, you need to be tracking these pollutants that were identified at that time. So from the early 90s to 2004, this was a bit before my time, I'll admit, but really, again, talking about the data management and some of the challenges with more of an Excel-based tool. There's a couple different systems that came to be that were Excel-based. Again, they did the job. There's just a challenge with some of the efficiencies of them, as well as potential for data overwrite. In 2004 is when Material Manager came to the marketplace, again, as a Microsoft Access database tool, and really, again, talking through the intentions here is that it's meant to be an easy to use tool that can provide information at your fingertips. Again, going back to the NBP EMS systems thinking that Trudy noted before. And we are currently in the process of evolving this access system to a cloud-based system due to a number of challenges that I'll be talking about here in a moment. So just high level, I just wanted to go through some of the Material Manager functionality. Really just, there's a lot of upfront thought in what are those main aspects of data management that any utility may be interested in. And one of the things that was used over and over again is a consistent and logical setup, something that someone can easily be able to follow as they are interested in managing their data. So there's 4 main tabs. One is data entry, which of course that's where all of the biosolids quality and agronomic rate input information is entered. Data reviewed, kind of as your self QA QC check. And then prescriptions and tracking, which is where, hey, I have my biosolids quality data, my ag data. Now I can develop some ag rates for my farmers to know how much material they're able to apply on the fields. And then the 4th piece, which again is I think where some of the utilities really lean on, is those reports. So some automated annual report templates, then instead of having to manually type things in, the information that is gathered and calculated in the Access database can really just be quickly calculated for these reports. Going into the data entry tab, here's a screenshot of one of the fields. The setup data, really, there's a variety of different pieces that need to be entered before any reports can be run. And there's, again, a lot of conscious thought behind, as a utility is entering into a new biosolids program or revising their biosolids program, what additional things will they need to be entering in? So there's an opportunity for new farms. Of course, we're qualifying and permitting new farms all the time. New sources. Oh, when would a utility need to have a new source? Oh, anytime that there is going to be a significant process change, maybe going from lime addition to some type of digestion process, or in the case of maybe a third party who may be using this tool, hey, I'm adding on utility B to utility A. And also the setup data allows for an opportunity for CPLR history. So maybe I'm a utility that I'm adopting a farm that used biosolids 1,000 years ago, and I want to make sure that I'm calculating, including any kind of historical pollutants that have been used. And then once that is all set up, there's this opportunity for what we call the maintenance data. So from a year-to-year basis, what are those things that are going to change? Of course, the biosolids quality is going to change every quarter or month or bi-monthly, depending on the frequency of collection. And then, of course, our cropping patterns are going to change. So adding these new agronomic rate inputs on a year-by-year basis. And for one of our clients, there was an interest in having a truck ticket tracking option where the truck is connected with a laboratory report, and that is tracked out to a specific farm site. So these are all the things that are going to be input on a routine basis. Once all the data is entered, then there's an opportunity for data review. Again, as thinking through the setup of this tool, it was apparent that when we're manually entering data into the system, there can be error. And also when we're entering in data, it's sometimes difficult in more of a form type format to ensure complete accuracy. So there's a functionality here that allows to see from a very high level snapshot what farm received material, what date they received it, what source that biosolids is connected to. So you can directly connect biosolids quality data to each amount of material that was applied on the site. And then also confirming that the total numbers of tons applied is matching any of the hauling tickets or your own records of the farmer spreading logs. The third component here is prescriptions and tracking. So once was the opportunity to enter in data, we've had this opportunity to review both the biosolids quality and the farm data. It's, hey, really what we want this tool to be used for is to know how many tons can go on a land application site. So there's a developed tool we're based on the crop year. There's an opportunity to have multiple different sources that can be included in a prescription. You can see this little box down at the bottom that you can check whichever sources you want to include. There's opportunities to select a specific percent total solids. If you have maybe a farmer who likes to push the line just a little bit, you might want to raise up that percent total solids just a little bit to make sure there's no over application, and also the opportunity for locking or unlocking the nutrient values if you want it directly connected to the most recent result, or have something that's a little bit more representative of the historical averages. Once we plug that in, again, there's the form that's provides a high level snapshot of all of the information that has been entered into the system and then what the output is. So you can see on the majority of the left-hand side, it's the field that information that has been provided, all of the source information and the nutrient content that has been provided. all of the cropping information that was provided for the farmer. And then this particular report is saying, hey, we can apply this amount of plant available nitrogen or this amount of nutrients for the remaining nitrogen need for this particular field. And it's provided on a dry ton and wet ton basis due to, again, regulatory tracking and also knowing that wet tons and dry tons, if you have a slightly different percent total solids, that can help mitigate any questions as to where that information is coming from. And then the final component of the tool, which again is incredibly useful, is this annual report, or this one-click option to be able to provide a loading rate by farm based on all of the information that has been put into the tool, doing a one-click CPLR. Hey, it does all of the calculations in the background, and you can run the CPLR. And if there is any kind of change in tonnage or analytical data, you go back and you change that. And again, it's this one-click update to the CPLR history that it pulls from each one of those individual components of the system. So again, this loading rate annual report, we have a high-level farm level description of how many wet tons were applied, how many dry tons were applied, what was the total number of dry tons or wet tons that the farm can receive. Can we compare those two to make sure there's been no over application? And then again, just looking at, in the case of Pennsylvania clients, there's an opportunity to just click a one-click button and you have this is the annual report form that, again, instead of having to manually fill it out, it's connected all directly to the data that's been gathered during the year. So I noted that the Access tool has been incredibly reliable. We've been using it for a long time, 20 plus years now. So there are, while it has wonderful uses, there are some limitations to the tool that we've identified and our clients have identified as well. For anyone who's familiar with Access, there's a variety of components associated with a user-friendly tool. There's back-end, front-end, lookup tables. There's a variety of different pieces that all need to be bundled together. And each one of those different pieces are locally housed. So anytime that there is an update to the software itself, it's going and talking to anyone who has that software to doing individually completing any of those updates on a one-by-one basis. The second piece is this local computer aspect, which can be challenging with respect to making sure that we're able to back up the data on a routine basis and have data reliability. We have had instances of data being lost because of not having the checking of making sure this data is being backed up correctly. Single user accessibility. This is true to any Microsoft Access program that at any given time, only one person can be in the software at a time. Again, for small utilities, this might be okay. For larger utilities where there might be a half a dozen or more people who want to touch the data, it can be a real limiting factor. And the final component I've listed here, there's probably a few others I haven't included, is the field functionality or the ability to access the data while you're out at a land application site. Perhaps if you wanted to verify, if an individual wanted to verify what type of agronomic rates were prepared and how much material was applied at a site, or updating how much material has been applied, that can't be completed in the field. You need to go back to the computer and do it from there. So where are we at in resolving this challenge? We identified an opportunity from moving this program from an Access locally housed system to more of a cloud-based program, which would be housed on a cloud server. We have spent quite a bit of time really in development and making sure that all of the data that has been reflected historically is now appropriately reflected in the cloud version. We are currently in beta testing with our first client on it. We really have, at this moment, have similar functionality to the existing Access version, making sure that all the numbers are crunching correctly, and there is an interest in adding additional modules moving forward. And really, I will say this, the movement from the cloud version, or from the Access version to the cloud version, has taken longer than we had ever anticipated. And some of the lessons learned for those who might be really focused on data and data management and development of database type systems is really defining what that base case is. What is the base model that we want? We have, I mentioned, a number of different clients who are using this tool at this point. Each has a slightly different need. They might have a couple different modules involved. So it's been a little bit of a moving target, which was not defined early enough in the process. I'll also note that going from a locally housed system to a cloud-based system is a whole new world. And because of that, those who are involved in the programming space, there's probably a dozen different people who have their own level of expertise to be able to get this product to the finish line. That in general, one person's not going to have all of those skill sets necessary to get this thing done. There's a database person, there's a front end person, there's a network person. Certainly something that was not necessarily expected as we were going into this. And the final component here is, I think anyone can look at in a really science-based database, is it's mirroring the programming expertise, the person who knows the IT, has the IT knowledge, with that person who understands the science and the logic behind it, that can verify, yes, these calculations are correct, or they make a lot of sense. So certainly has been a world of learning, and we're excited to get this over the finish line, to be able to roll this out to additional clients. So again, in tying it all together, Trudy focused on data management and control of data as it relates to the National Biosolids Partnership. Material Manager I've defined as this tool as a way to document and reliably house your data and be able to pull that out at a moment's notice. But I think what goes beyond that is effective data management program is not just having a tool that can manage the data. The tool is only as good as the user who is using it and the system surrounding it for QA, QC. So really, when we're thinking about data and data management, especially as it relates to the NBP EMS system, we have this effective tool on the right-hand side, and there's this data ownership component. The other two very important pieces is the QA, QC, and controls, and the training and understanding of those users of that tool to make sure that the information that's being calculated by the tool is in fact correct. And control over the utility's own data is critical to manage a variety of the things I talked about at the beginning of this presentation. So liability, public perception and messaging, changes in contractors and data access. And again, that data management tool is only as good as those who are using it, which is again where the National Biosolids Partnership and National Biosolids Code of Good Practice come into play. And so with that, we are done. And this particular photo is at WEF Tech this past fall. There was a number of new auditors who took the test and passed. So Nick Hines there on the right-hand side is a Material Matters employee, as well as a number of other familiar faces. So I appreciate this opportunity to present, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I definitely see some familiar faces in the small world of biosolids and residuals there. I can start us off with a couple questions while we wait for folks sometimes they're shy typing in their questions there. So folks can either type your questions into the Q&A for me, or if you want to, I don't know if there's a way, I think the chat might be. Okay, I'm getting a question now, but let me ask you my question first. So thank you for the history of that software. It makes sense how it was developed. But you mentioned additional modules. What are you referring to, and what are you thinking of for future modules?
So really the sky's the limit there, Janine. In the existing program, which we are working on, we'll be working as a future module for the cloud-based program. I mentioned a lot during the presentation about nutrient management as it relates to nitrogen. In Pennsylvania, at this point in time, we are on a nitrogen-based land application rate. There is an option in our current, in the access database, that it to be on a phosphorus based rate. So it seems pretty simple and straightforward. Again, for those who aren't necessarily as familiar with land application of biosolids in general, if we're applying on a nitrogen rate, we're applying too much phosphorus for the crops, which can be problematic from an environmental standpoint, potentially. There are some states that do require looking at how much phosphorus is applied to a site, looking at the phosphorus index and using a phosphorus-based tracking system. So that might be one good example of something that we've looked at as far as different types of modules.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. All right, we have a question here, and it's again about the cloud-based system. How are you managing data security on the cloud side of things for the clients who have a particular data security concern? Yeah, a lot of utilities that's a good question, so.
That is an excellent question, and that has been a question that we have been asked from our clients. And so we're relying on a team of experts who know all of the things there are to know about data security. And one of the pieces is, in general, we're looking at using an Azure server for the data security. And so it's really looking at having Microsoft security, and it's also teamed with, and I apologize, I'm going to probably not answer this how somebody who's knows all the things about security, but there's also components where data is backed up on a separate server as well. So it's not just reliant on this single server. Hey, what happens to that server? But it's also having the backup on a separate server, which is pretty standard practice for when you're looking at housing data on the web. So yes, that's been a question that has been asked, and we are working to make sure that we're following all of the industry standards when it comes to data protection.
All right, excellent. Continuing with questions, for people currently using Material Manager's access-based system, will there be a pathway to do a seamless migration to the cloud? I just love that you keep saying how complicated things are, because yeah, I agree. Biosolids management is complicated. Their data management complicated.
That's a really great question. We are working diligently, I mentioned, with our client number one in making sure that this is a seamless transition. And how we are doing that at this point is we are co-running their access program with the cloud-based version to ensure that the data is connecting and coming over correctly, so that when we do pull the plug on the access version, we can be sure that we have a history of that data being pulled in correctly and accurately. So I would say that we are doing the best we can to make sure that it is as seamless as possible, but I'm not going to say it's going to be, I can't guarantee that it's going to be perfect, but I do think that there will be a number of lessons learned with our first client that we will hope to address and use for any future clients that may be using the cloud version.
Yeah, that's a smart way to do it. It's one pane, not everyone's. But so, and will it look the same, Lisa? Will it will the screens look the same and that kind of stuff to facilitate the transition?
So the screens are at this point looking a little bit different. The final reports look very similar. And I will emphasize here that our effort and focus on the first component of this program is on the data. So with that back end piece. And so I mentioned there's a number of different experts that are involved in this process. And one of them is, for anyone who's not familiar, there's something called UIX or UX, or I don't even know all the things, but it's user interface experience, UIX. And so at this point in time, I will admittedly state we have not focused on the user experience. That is probably going to be a version 2.0. We're really focused on the functionality to make sure that this tool is really effective and can be used pretty intuitively, and we'll make it look pretty
Great,
at a
fair
later
enough.
version.
Is Trudy still around? This
She
one's for her, I
is.
think.
She is.
All right, Trudy, is participating in the NBP a good fit for smaller biosolids programs, especially those that rely on third-party contractors for final disposition?
We were lucky enough to engage with several small utilities here in Pennsylvania in the initial phase of the NBP program. And really, it's just a pared down version of what, for example, DC Water has always been involved in a program from the beginning. Of course, their program looks a little bit different than maybe somebody that's an one MGD plant. But it basically was fairly easy for those folks because of the guidance that was provided by NBP and some training that was done by NBP, and then having consultants come in and sort of assist with those couple pieces that they needed to assist with. So I think there was an incredible range of utilities that were involved, you know, from the very beginning, all the way from 500,000 gallon a day, all the way up to DC Water size treatment plants. So I would say, as far as I know, we helped set up a couple of those small programs, and I didn't see any extreme challenges. Systems thinking, though, is sort of the first thing you have to overcome is how do I understand the role of a systems thinker versus a compliance-based person? That's really the biggest obstacle to overcome. And that really just comes with some training and support from NBP and looking at their mounds of good guidance. And I'm sure that there are other folks that are now still involved in NBP program who are always willing to help.
So if you got a champion at a small utility, this is definitely doable.
Absolutely.
All
I would
right.
encourage it.
All right. Got another question here. Could the system be used to manage data of multiple biosolids generators going to one location?
It can. So you mentioned, Janine, that we've done work across the US, and it's very interesting. Each state has its own set of regulations, and we've
Each
modified.
state has its own personality. Totally right.
We've modified, that's some of the other pieces too. So we've modified Material Manager for different clients who are in a handful of different states. I think we've got four different states right now that are currently using Material Manager. And so there are some states that you are only allowed to have one source on one field in a given year. Lucky enough for Pennsylvania, we are not one of those states. So it was originally fashioned with a local thought process in mind. So yes, we do have and so Material Manager, we use it internally for some of our clients, and we have licenses for some of our clients. But there are many instances where there's multiple sources going on the same site in the same crop year and or calendar year.
Okay. Here's another question on the NBP. How many, and this was kind of related to the question we were talking about small utilities, but how many staff are required to develop and implement a successful EMS system? And do you know what the cost of the audit is if you were to get a third-party audit?
I know that the program has evolved significantly over the years. Back in the early 2000s, when it was first developed and implemented, there was not a level of experience with small and large utilities. Now we've had 20 some years of experience with that. And I think the NBP program now has been sort of tailored towards making it a little bit easier for folks to adopt. So I would say that the MVP has wonderful support materials that are available. I think if you're a small utility, of course, all small utilities, you have to be a jack of all trades, right?
Yeah.
So it would probably be a collaborative effort. I'm not sure that after maybe some initial work with MVP or a consultant that it could be run by the existing staff. I don't think there's anything maybe different in what you're doing. It's maybe better documented, or maybe there's better planning, or maybe there's better collaboration, maybe there's accentuated data review. But there's those extra pieces. It's all part of what wastewater treatment operators do every day anyway. So I don't think in the long run it would take additional folks. It would just be a different way of thinking, because again, outcomes matter and biosolids quality matters. I mean, that's really at the heart of this. And so I think that's what we all do for a living every day anyway.
And I
And
think
just
one
on
of
the consultant, the audit cost, if you were to,
Oh, I'm sorry. I haven't been involved in the last couple of years in the MVP program. I know that you can shift now to internal auditing. So we've done some internal audit training so folks can do their own audit. I don't think that somebody else might have to answer this question, but I don't think that there has to be an external auditor like there did in the beginning. I think
Okay.
you can be trained now to do your own internal auditing.
okay.
So perhaps a cost of the time of your folks to do the audit. And I know in doing the training, an audit, of course, any auditor doesn't look at every element of the program every time there's an audit. They will pick and choose. Well, let's do element 5 and 8 this time, and we're going to focus on that. So I would say overall, it might take a 2-day period for the auditors, the internal auditors, to do their work, and then to report back to the management group on what they found, if there's conformance or non-conformance, and what corrective actions they may have to take. So it may involve several people from the wastewater treatment plant over maybe a week period of time. That's my best guess.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
I think one of the things that maybe isn't necessarily stated up front is in talking with utilities, there's this strong interest in risk aversion, but there's
Yes.
costs too. So really, from my perspective, the NBP, there's some more upfront costs to develop systems and checks and balances in place upfront, so you don't have an oh crap moment later on, which may cost 2,
Yep.
4, 15, 20 times the amount of that pre-planning. So that's really, again, I think something that's maybe not looked at as closely, if there's this concern or thought of like the upfront costs, but really, if you looked at if you have the resources to look at the big picture, and you have some high level people who are interested in looking at the big picture and preparing for down the road, I think the overall benefit is way less costly than if these systems aren't implemented and something were to fall.
All right, thanks. So that's it for questions on NBP, I think. The rest are on the software here. And this one is commercially, are you going down a pathway with a licensing, like one time per utility, or a subscription-based annual fee model, or what? That's very interesting, because we're looking at that right now for the beam. How are you going to do that?
So the plan would be for a licensed based software. And so which would be an annual fee. And for those who are not necessarily in the software space, and I was too, of, hey, why am I getting this annual cost for this software that I used to be able to purchase? The reality is that storage space on a cloud server costs money. Every time you use data, it costs money. So it's interesting when you look at cloud-based platforms that there is a certain baseline cost that would need to occur one way or another, because we're using space on a cloud server. So that's, again, that was
Understood.
new to me.
Yeah.
That was new to me
Oh, I
when we
bet you'll
started
learn a
down
lot
this
about.
path. Yeah, so, but yes, it would be, we are currently looking at a license-based rate, and it's based on the amount of data that is used, the size of the utility, the number of farm sites, those types of things.
Okay. All right. Here's a question from Canada. Have some utilities, are you aware of them making it mandatory for their subcontractors to use the software as part of their land application
Yes,
program?
yes. Trudy's whispering from the background. Yes, yes. There is one, I'm aware of at least one instance where that is the case.
Yeah,
All right. Yeah, I mean, it's
Trudy's
Yeah.
gonna interject.
Just let me add to that too, because this is one of my clients. That's been the requirement since the beginning. And the contractor is given full access and is also told, here are the components, contractor, that you need to deal with. So it's a collaborative effort, but then when one contractor leaves and a new contractor shows up, the client, the utility still owns the data, still manages the data, still has the data, and still is in control of the data. And that's been a great advantage for them.
yeah,
And it was, I mean, and
seamless
again, I think
transition.
Turkey, and then kind of going full circle, part of the reason for that was this particular utility's involvement with the National Biosolids Partnership. So again,
Mhm.
going full circle, they were a member, may still be, but it was as part of that NBP systems thinking, data ownership and management aspect, which I think was part of the reason for making that requirement occur.
All right, and of course, we could not get through this without talking about PFAS. But there is a question here. It's a great question. If you have any thoughts on modifying modules that may also address and track any future contaminants of concern, we have a few PFAS,
Yeah,
microplastics, and then beyond adding just phosphorus-based loadings and agronomic rates.
yeah, so we do have it actually, that is one slightly different piece in the cloud version that we've had, knowing that there could be other things coming down the pipeline that right now, in the access-based version, there's the tried and true 503 pollutants that were identified and are being tracked. We do have the opportunity, it's been programmed intentionally in the cloud-based platform, that you can add additional pollutants or whatever we're tracking, and include those in any kind of regulatory ways or cumulative loading rate types of ways. So yes, we do, again, the PFAS conversation, I guess, came at a reasonable time, that was something that was front and center when we were looking at developing the cloud-based platform.
All right. I don't know. I don't see any other questions. I was wondering if you could just chat a little bit about how you might generate data or information from these reports in communicating with the communities. Like how, can you think of how people have used that to?
Yeah, so that's actually that's a great question. So we have one example that we have used. So again, originally this program was developed strictly for regulatory compliance and data tracking. And I mentioned there's a couple of reports that are annual reports that grabs data and spits out a report. We have a module or a report that it's a farmer based report. So it has
Okay.
a summary of all of the information, and it goes on a farm by farm based way of, here's the amount, here's the CPLR, and here's what has been actually applied. So it's more like a pamphlet brochure that can be provided to farmers directly based on who are already in the program. But certainly something like that could be developed or added in for other types of fact sheets, et cetera, that could be used
Other
for the
audiences, like the
community.
general public that lives around them and that kind of stuff. All right.
Right,
All right.
right.
All right. Well, this time flew by here, but we're already at the end of our time. So I want to thank Lisa and Trudy. This was a great presentation and discussion. Very important topic. And thanks again to Material Matters Inc. for sponsoring today. And thank you everyone for attending. We hope you found this helpful. I will send out the slide deck and some of those resources and the link to the recording early next week. And next month, we're going to lunch and learn about the biosolids emissions assessment model. I know it's not politically correct to talk about climate change right now, but we at NEBRA are very concerned with greenhouse gas emissions from solids management operations. So we have a good session coming up on that in May. As always, if there's something you want to lunch and learn about, please email me, give me a call. I'm always looking for suggestions. Thanks again for attending today. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone.